You wake to the sound of metal striking bamboo. It's still dark, that gray darkness that comes before dawn in the Pacific tropics. Your body aches in ways you never knew possible, and the taste of rust and salt fills your mouth. You're lying on bamboo slats that have carved ridges into your hip bones, covered only by a tattered piece of cloth that once might have been part of a uniform. The sound comes again. Clang, clang. A Japanese guard walks between the rows of raised sleeping platforms, striking each one with his bayonet. Around you, shadows begin to stir. Men who look more like walking skeletons than soldiers slowly push themselves upright. Their eyes are hollow, sunken deep into skulls that seem too large for their faces. This is your reality now. This is what it means to be a prisoner of war in the hands of the Imperial Japanese Army during World War II. But before we step into this nightmare, you need to understand how you got here. Because this isn't just a story about suffering, it's a story about what human beings can endure and what they become when pushed beyond every conceivable limit. It's December 8, 1941, just hours after the attack on Pearl Harbor. You're stationed in the Philippines, part of the combined American-Filipino Defense Force trying to hold back the Japanese invasion. The bombs started falling on Clark Field even before the smoke had cleared from Pearl Harbor. Your squadron of P-40 fighter planes, gone, destroyed on the ground like sitting ducks. General MacArthur's grand plan to hold the beaches has crumbled within days. The Japanese military began its assault on the Philippines, bombing airfields and bases, harbors and shipyards, while you and 70,000 other American and Filipino defenders find yourselves retreating to a jungle peninsula called Bataan. You're hungry already. The retreat happened so fast that tons of supplies were left behind: rice, ammunition, medical equipment. All of it now in Japanese hands. MacArthur had planned badly for the withdrawal and had left tons of rice, ammunition, and other stores behind him. From the moment you reach Bataan, you're on half rations. The jungle sounds different when you're starving. Every rustle could be food. A monkey, a snake, anything with meat on its bones. You've lost 20 pounds in 3 months. Your uniform hangs on you like it belongs to someone else. The man next to you, Private Johnson from Iowa, weighs maybe 90 pounds now. His eyes have that glazed look that comes when your body starts eating itself. Sick with malaria, dengue fever, and other diseases, living on monkey meat and a few grains of rice, and without air cover or naval support. The Allied force of Filipinos and Americans held out for 99 days. 99 days of hell. 99 days of bombing, shelling, and watching your friends die, not from enemy bullets but from starvation and disease. You're sharing a foxhole with 3 other men when the word comes down: surrender. April 9. Major General Edward King, the man who took over from MacArthur, has decided he can't watch any more soldiers die from hunger. The Japanese have won, but surrender, you're about to learn, is just the beginning of your nightmare. The Japanese soldiers who take your surrender look different than you expected. Some are barely taller than your chest, but there's something in their eyes, a hardness, a contempt that chills you. When you raise your hands, one of them steps forward and rips the watch from your wrists. Another yanks off your boots. A third searches your pockets and takes the folded photograph of your girl back home. The one you've carried through months of jungle fighting. He looks at it, smiles, and tears it in half. You want to protest, to fight, but you're too weak, and something in their faces tells you that would be a very, very bad idea. They bind your hands behind your back with wire. The wire cuts into your wrists immediately, and you realize it's going to get much tighter as your hands swell. Around you, thousands of other prisoners are being processed the same way. Filipino soldiers, American GIs, some medics still trying to tend to wounded men. The Japanese guards shout at you in a language you don't understand, but their meaning is clear. Start walking. You don't know it yet, but you've just begun the Bataan Death March. The road is nothing but dirt and stones, and the sun is already climbing toward its midday peak. You're part of a column of about 100 men, strung out along the dusty road like a chain of broken links. In front of you walks a Filipino soldier who can't be more than 18 years old. Behind you, an American sergeant from your own unit who used to weigh 200 pounds but now looks like a scarecrow in uniform. The total distance marched from Mariveles to San Fernando, and from the Capas train station to various camps, was 65 miles. The guards walk alongside the column, their rifles slung casually over their shoulders. They're well fed, their uniforms clean and pressed. Every few minutes one of them barks an order in Japanese. You learn quickly what speedo means. Faster. Always faster. No matter how fast you walk, it's never fast enough. The tropical sun beats down mercilessly. Within an hour your uniform is soaked with sweat. Within 2 hours you're not sweating anymore. A bad sign. Your body is shutting down, conserving what little water it has left. It happens about 5 miles into the march. The young Filipino in front of you stumbles, catches himself, stumbles again. On the third stumble he doesn't get back up. He just sits down heavily in the dust, his head hanging between his knees. A Japanese guard notices immediately. He walks over, says something in Japanese. The boy doesn't respond, probably doesn't understand, probably doesn't have the strength to care. The guard unslings his rifle, reverses it, and brings the butt down hard on the boy's skull. The sound is wet and fine. The boy crumples sideways into the dust, blood pooling beneath his head. The guard looks at the rest of you, his message clear. Keep walking. Those who dropped from exhaustion or sickness, fell behind, broke ranks to fetch water, or tried to escape, were bayoneted, shot, or beheaded. You step around the body and keep moving. What else can you do? This is your first lesson in what it means to be a prisoner of the Japanese. Surrender is shameful, and shameful men deserve no mercy. By the third day, water has become more precious than gold. Your tongue feels like leather in your mouth. Your lips are cracked and bleeding. The guards carry canteens that they drink from regularly, letting the water spill over their chins in a display of casual abundance. You pass a small stream running beside the road. The water looks brown and muddy, but it's water. Several men break from the column, desperate. The guards let them reach the water before opening fire. The bodies float face down in the stream, turning the water redder. The rest of you keep walking. Sometimes Filipino civilians brave enough to help throw fruit or rice balls to the prisoners. The guards usually beat these civilians away, but occasionally they're distracted. You catch a small ball of rice wrapped in a banana leaf. It's the first solid food you've had in 2 days, and it tastes better than any meal you've ever eaten. The man next to you wasn't so lucky. He stumbles and falls, and when he tries to get up, his legs won't support him. 2 other prisoners help him to his feet, but he can barely stand. You know what's going to happen, and you know there's nothing you can do about it. After 5 days of walking, you reach San Fernando. Your feet are bloody stumps inside what's left of your boot. You've watched hundreds of men die along the road, shot, bayoneted, beaten to death, or simply left to die where they fell. The column that started with 100 men now has maybe 60. But San Fernando isn't salvation. It's just another kind of hell. The train cars waiting for you are metal boxes designed to carry freight, not people. Prisoners were jammed into small pre-war boxcars, 100 men or more into a conveyance meant for 4. You're pushed and shoved into one of these cars with 99 other men. There's no room to sit, barely room to stand. The doors slam shut, and you're plunged into darkness. The metal walls trap the heat like an oven. Within minutes the temperature inside must be over 100 degrees. Men are fainting, but there's nowhere for them to fall. The press of bodies keeps them upright. The train lurches into motion. The journey to Capas takes several hours, but it feels like days. Men are dying on their feet, their bodies held up by the crush around them. The smell is indescribable. Sweat, urine, vomit, and the sweet stench of death. When the doors finally open in Capas, bodies tumble out like cordwood. There was little air in the oven-like cars, and hundreds of men died standing up. You're one of the lucky ones. You're still breathing, but you're not at your destination yet. There's still another march ahead. This one shorter but somehow worse because you know what awaits you at the end. Camp O'Donnell sits on a flat plain about 7 miles from the Capiz train station. It was built as a training facility for the Philippine Army, but the Japanese have converted it into something else entirely. A place where men go to die slowly. The camp is surrounded by barbed wire and guard towers. Inside, the buildings are long, low barracks made of bamboo and palm fronds. They look like they might blow away in a strong wind. And you'll soon learn that during the monsoon season they might as well not exist at all. Of the estimated 80,000 POWs at the march, only 54,000 made it to Camp O'Donnell. 26,000 men died on the march, or on the train. But for those of you who made it, O'Donnell becomes a new definition of hell. The camp commandant, a thin Japanese officer with wire-rimmed glasses, gives you a speech through an interpreter. The essence is simple. You are not prisoners of war. You are captured personnel who have disgraced yourselves through surrender. You will be treated accordingly. Your barracks is a bamboo structure about 100 feet long and 30 feet wide. It's supposed to house 50 men. There are 200 of you crammed inside. The floor is dirt, mixed with bamboo slats, and your bed is a space barely wide enough for your body on a raised platform made of more bamboo. The man next to you is a Marine from Corregidor, named Stevens. He made it off the island fortress before it fell and somehow survived the death march. He tells you that the Japanese consider surrender the ultimate shame, worse than death. That's why they treat prisoners the way they do. To them, you're already dead. They're just deciding how quickly to dispose of the body. The latrines are open pits about 50 yards from the barrack. There are 2 of them for over 8,000 prisoners. By your second day you understand why dysentery spreads through the camp like wildfire. The flies that buzz around the pits come directly to the food lines, carrying death on their legs. Water comes from 2 wells that may or may not be contaminated. The guards don't care. They have their own water supply, and your problems aren't their concern. You wake at 4:30 a.m. to the sound of guards shouting Kora, the command to assemble. You stumble out of the barracks with the other skeletons and line up in rows for roll call. This process, called number, takes at least an hour. The guards count you over and over. Ichi ni san shi. If the count doesn't match their records, everyone stands in the sun until they figure out why. Sometimes the discrepancy is because someone died during the night. Sometimes it's because a guard can't count. It doesn't matter. You stand in the heat until they're satisfied. After roll call comes breakfast. A small bowl of rice with maybe a few vegetables mixed in. The rice is often moldy, sometimes crawling with weevils. You eat it anyway. Allied POWs were forced to subsist on a diet of sometimes as little as 600 calories per day, resulting in widespread malnourishment and critical levels of starvation. 600 calories. A normal man needs about 2,500 calories a day. You're getting less than a quarter of what your body needs to survive. By your second week in O'Donnell, you've stopped counting the bodies. Every morning brings a new harvest of men who couldn't make it through another night. Disease was rampant throughout the camp, with estimates of 400 prisoners dying each day. 400 men dying every single day. The death rate is so high that the Japanese have given up trying to maintain individual graves. Bodies are dumped into mass graves dug by prisoner work detail. You volunteer for grave duty once, anything to get extra food, and spend a day dragging corpses by their arms and legs, tossing them into pits like discarded lumber. The bodies are light. Most men weigh less than 100 pounds when they die. Their faces have a universal look: sunken cheeks, prominent skull bones, eyes that stare at nothing. You wonder if that's what you look like now. Stevens, your bunkmate, develops dysentery in the 3rd week. It starts with stomach cramps and loose stools, but dysentery in a prison camp is a death sentence. Within days he's passing nothing but blood and mucus. His body wastes away before your eyes. On a Tuesday night he whispers that he dreamed about his mother's apple pie. On Wednesday morning, he's gone. The camp has a medical facility, if you can call it that. It's another bamboo barracks where the sickest prisoners are left to die. There are no medicines, no real medical supplies, and the doctors are prisoners themselves, working without tools or resources. You visit the hospital once when your dysentery gets bad enough that you can't stand for roll call. The doctor is an American Army medic who used to weigh 180 pounds but now looks like a concentration camp survivor. He examines you without instruments, his hands gentle but essentially useless. I can't give you medicine because there isn't any, he tells you. I can't give you clean water because there isn't any. I can't give you nutritious food because there isn't any. What I can tell you is this: if you give up, you'll die. If you keep fighting, you might die anyway, but at least you'll have a chance. You go back to your barracks and somehow keep fighting. Despite your condition, you're still expected to work. The Japanese have various projects that need prisoner labor. Building roads, constructing new barracks, maintaining the camp. The work details are often a death sentence, but they sometimes come with extra food rations. You volunteer for the farm detail, 500 acres where prisoners grow vegetables for the Japanese garrison. The work is backbreaking, digging, planting, weeding under the tropical sun with no shade and minimal water break. But sometimes you can steal a carrot or a handful of rice, and that extra nutrition might be the difference between life and death. The guards watch constantly, ready to beat anyone they catch stealing food. The punishment for taking a single grain of rice might be a severe beating, solitary confinement, or execution. But hunger makes people desperate, and desperate people take desperate chances. Once a month, the Japanese allow prisoners to write letters home. The letters are heavily censored, and you're required to say that you're being treated well and are in good health. Any deviation from the approved message means the letter won't be sent. You write to your mother in Ohio: "Dear Mama, I am well and being treated fairly by my captors. The food is adequate and I am in good health. Please don't worry about me. Love, your son." Every word is a lie, but it's the only way to get any word home at all. You wonder what your mother will think when she reads it, whether she'll believe the obvious lies or read between the lines and understand the truth. Sometimes letters arrive from home. They're usually months old by the time they reach the camp, and they've been read and censored by Japanese authorities. But holding a piece of paper that your mother touched, seeing her handwriting, feeling connected to a world outside the barbed wire, it's almost worth the agony of false hope. After 8 months in Camp O'Donnell, you've somehow survived when thousands haven't. You weigh maybe 110 pounds, down from your pre-war weight of 106. Your ribs show through your skin like ladder rungs, and your legs are so thin they barely seem capable of supporting even your diminished weight. But you're still alive, which makes you valuable to the Japanese. They need workers for a new project, something they call the Thailand-Burma Railway. The guards move through the camp selecting prisoners for transport. The criteria seem random. Some men are chosen who can barely walk, while others who seem relatively healthy are left behind. Stephen's replacement in the bunk next to you is a British soldier named Fletcher who was captured when Singapore fell. He knows more about what's happening in the war than most of the Americans. According to Fletcher, the Japanese are building a railway through the jungle to supply their forces in Burma. After the Japanese were defeated in the battles of the Coral Sea, May 4-8 in 1942 and Midway, June 3-6, 1942, the sea lanes between the Japanese home islands and Burma were no longer secure. They need an overland route, Fletcher explains in his clipped accent, and they need us to build it. The transport to Thailand is aboard another converted cargo ship. This one is larger than the train cars you endured after the Death March, but not by much. You're packed into the hold with about 1,000 other prisoners. Americans, British, Dutch, Australians, all the survivors of various defeats across the Pacific. Tens of thousands of POWs were packed onto vessels that came to be known as hell ships. 1 in 5 prisoners did not survive the cramped, disease-ridden journey. The hold is hot, airless, and reeks of human waste and death. Men are dying constantly, and their bodies are left among the living because there's nowhere else to put them. You find a space near a bulkhead and claim your territory. A rectangle of metal deck about the size of a coffin. You'll spend the next 2 weeks in this space, leaving only for the daily climb to the deck for a few minutes of fresh air and a ladle of rice soup. The ship pitches and rolls in heavy seas, and seasickness combines with starvation and disease to create a nightmare beyond description. Men vomit on each other because there's nowhere else to be sick. The smell becomes so overwhelming that you stop noticing it, which is probably a mercy. Fletcher, crammed in next to you, develops a high fever on the 5th day. By the 7th day, he's delirious, talking to people who aren't there, calling for his mother. On the 9th day, he stops talking altogether. On the 10th day, he's dead, his body rigid and cold against your side. You spend 4 more days lying next to his corpse before someone comes to drag it away. The port of Bangkok is a shock after 2 weeks in the ship's hold. The sun seems impossibly bright, the air fresh and clean despite the tropical humidity. You stumble down the gangplank on legs that barely remember how to walk, and for a moment you feel something that might be hope. It doesn't last long. The Japanese guards at the port are different from the ones you've known. These are combat veterans, hard men with the look of soldiers who've seen too much killing. They organize the surviving prisoners into work gangs, and you quickly learn that this is not going to be easier than what you've already endured. A Japanese officer addresses the assembled prisoners through an interpreter. The message is simple. You're going to build a railway through some of the most hostile jungle terrain on Earth. You're going to work from dawn to dusk, 7 days a week. Those who work hard might survive. Those who don't will be left to die in the jungle. The officer pauses, looking out over the sea of skeletal faces. You have 18 months to complete this railway, he says. The timetable will not change. If you die, others will take your place, but the railway will be built. The train that takes you into the jungle is another cattle car, but this journey is shorter. Only a day and a half. Through the slats you watch the landscape change from rice paddies to dense tropical forest. The trees grow taller and thicker, closing over the tracks like a green tunnel. You're traveling with about 50 other prisoners, most of them British and Australian soldiers captured when Singapore fell. There's also a Dutch medical officer named Van der Berg, who somehow managed to keep his medical kit through months of captivity. He moves quietly through the car, checking on the sickest prisoners, though there's little he can do for them. The Australian next to you is named Kowalski. He's from somewhere outside Melbourne and has been a prisoner for over a year. His body is a map of scars and poorly healed wounds, but his eyes still hold a spark of defiance that you haven't seen in months. The trick, he tells you in a voice that barely rises above a whisper, is to become invisible. Don't draw attention, don't show weakness, but don't show strength either. Just be part of the background until you find a chance to help someone or grab a bit of extra food. You file this advice away. In your current condition, any wisdom about survival is precious. The train stops at a small clearing hacked out of the jungle. This is your destination. Kilometer 105, one of hundreds of work camps scattered along the proposed route of the Thailand-Burma Railway. The camp consists of a few bamboo huts, a guardhouse, and not much else. Beyond the clearing, the jungle stretches endlessly in all directions, but what dominates the landscape is the railway cutting itself. A scar through the jungle, maybe 20 feet wide, filled with tree stumps, rocks, and mud. This is what you're going to build. A Fort 150 railway between Ban Pong, Thailand, and Thinbuzayat, Burma. 415 kilometers of track through some of the most challenging terrain on Earth. The Japanese engineer in charge of your section gives you a brief orientation. Working hours are from 5 a.m. to 8 p.m. 7 days a week. Food will be rice and vegetables twice a day. Medical care will be provided by prisoner doctors with whatever supplies are available. The railway must be completed on schedule. Any questions? He asks through the interpreter. No one asks any questions. After months of captivity, you've learned that questions are dangerous and answers are usually worse than ignorance. Your first day on the railway begins at 4:30 a.m. with the familiar sound of guards banging on metal. You roll off your bamboo sleeping platform and stumble outside for roll call. The jungle air is thick with moisture and alive with the sounds of insects and birds you can't identify. After a breakfast of rice soup, more water than rice, you're marched to your work site about a mile from camp. Your job is simple in concept, impossible in execution. Cut a path for the railway through solid jungle. The tools you're given are primitive: a short-handled shovel, a machete, and a bamboo basket for carrying dirt and rocks. No bulldozers, no dynamite, no modern equipment of any kind, just muscle power and hand tools, wielded by men who are already half dead from starvation. They built the track with hand tools and muscle power, working through the monsoon of night. All were urged on by the cry speedo, speedo, faster, always faster. No matter how hard you work, no matter how much earth you move or how many trees you cut down, it's never enough. The guards walk constantly among the work parties, shouting speedo, and reinforcing their commands with rifle butts and bamboo sticks. The jungle doesn't want to be conquered. Every tree you cut down seems to be replaced by two more over. The ground is either rock-hard clay that breaks your tools or sticky mud that swallows your feet. Roots run everywhere, thick as your arm and tough as steel cable. During the first week, your work party manages to clear maybe 50 yards of track. It's back-breaking labor in heat that rarely drops below 90 degrees and humidity that makes the air feel like soup. Your clothes are soaked with sweat within minutes of starting work, and they never really dry. The insects are relentless. Mosquitoes swarm in clouds so thick they black out the sun. Leeches drop from trees and attach themselves to any exposed skin, growing fat with your blood. Ants the size of beetles bite with mandibles that leave wounds that fester in the tropical heat. But the worst are the spiders. Some are as large as dinner plates, hairy and aggressive. You learn to check your tools before picking them up, to shake out your boots before putting them on, to never reach into any dark space without looking first. 2 months into your time on the railway, the monsoon season begins. You thought you understood rain, but this is something else entirely. Water falling from the sky like a punishment from God. It rains for hours, sometimes for days without stopping. The jungle becomes a vast swamp, and the railway cutting fills with mud that swallows men up to their waists. Working in the monsoon is like trying to dig a hole in the ocean. Every shovelful of dirt you remove is immediately replaced by mud flowing down from the hills. The track bed becomes a river, and your work becomes futile. But the schedule doesn't change. Speedo, speedo, always speedo. Your bamboo barracks leak like sieves. Water pours through the roof, turning the dirt floor into a swamp. Everything you own is soaked constantly. Your clothes, your bedding, your skin. Fungal infections spread across your body, and jungle rot eats away at your feet. The guards have waterproof gear and heated quarters. You have nothing but what you're wearing, and that's falling apart. Your boots disintegrated weeks ago, leaving you to work barefoot on rocks and roots that slice your feet to ribbons. Dr. Vanderberg does his best with almost nothing. His medical kit contains a few bandages, some aspirin, and little else. For everything else, malaria, dysentery, infected wounds, tropical ulcers, he has only his knowledge and whatever he can improvise from jungle plants. Malaria is everywhere. The mosquitoes that swarm around the work sites carry it, and without proper medication, it's often fatal. You watch men burn with fever one day and shiver with chills the next, their bodies racked with symptoms that Vanderberg can barely treat. Dysentery runs through the camp in waves. Men waste away from the inside, their bodies unable to absorb nutrition from the meager food supplies. The latrines become scenes of agony, with prisoners squatting over holes in the ground, passing blood and mucus while their bodies consume themselves. But the worst are the tropical ulcers, wounds that won't heal in the jungle heat and humidity. A small cut from a piece of bamboo becomes infected,
then grows larger and deeper. Without proper antiseptics, the infection spread. You've seen ulcers eat through a man's leg to the bone, exposing white calcium in wounds that smell like rotting meat. Vanderberg does what he can with boiled water and bandages made from torn clothing, but men die from infections that would be trivial to treat in a real hospital. You help him sometimes, holding down patients while he drains infected wounds or tries to close ulcers with improvised sutures. The screaming stays with you. The daily ration consists of 2 meals, rice soup in the morning and rice with vegetables in the evening. The daily food allotment typically included small portions of boiled rice and spoiled meat or fish. Rations were routinely contaminated with rat droppings and infested with maggots. The rice is often moldy, the vegetables rotten, and the occasional piece of fish or meat so spoiled it glows green in the dark.
But you eat it anyway. Hunger becomes a living thing inside you, gnawing at your belly, weakening your muscles, clouding your thoughts. You catch yourself staring at tree bark and wondering if it's edible. You dream about food constantly. Your mother's pot roast, hot dogs at baseball games, fresh bread with butter. Some prisoners try to supplement their rations by catching jungle creatures, rats, snakes, insects, anything that might provide a few extra calories. You eat things you never imagined consuming. Grubs pulled from rotting logs, lizards caught sunning themselves on rocks, leaves that might or might not be poisonous. The guards eat well. Their meals include fresh meat, vegetables and rice that isn't contaminated with insects and mold. Sometimes they eat in front of the prisoners deliberately, making a show of abundance while you waste away. News travels through the prison camps via the bamboo telegraph. Whispered conversations, secret messages, information passed from camp to camp by work details and transferred prisoners. Most of the news is rumors and wishful thinking, but occasionally real information filters through. You learn that the war is not going well for the Japanese. American forces have invaded somewhere called Guadalcanal. The German advance in Russia has been stopped. Allied bombers are hitting Japanese cities. But these victories seem remote and meaningless when your entire world has shrunk to a few square miles of jungle and the daily struggle to survive. More immediate is information about conditions in other camps. Some are better than yours. Camps where the commandants are less brutal, where food supplies are more adequate, where medical care exists. Others are worse. Places where the death rate approaches 100%, where prisoners are worked literally to death. You also hear about escape attempts. Most end badly. Prisoners shot while trying to flee, or recaptured and executed as an example to others. The jungle itself is almost impossible to navigate without guides and supplies, and you're hundreds of miles from Allied territory. But some men try anyway, driven to desperation by conditions that make death seem preferable to continued captivity. In the midst of unimaginable cruelty, small acts of kindness become beacons of hope. Kowalski, the Australian, shares his meager rations with prisoners too sick to work. Vanderberg risks punishment by treating prisoners after official medical hours. A British sergeant named Williams uses his engineering knowledge to make the work more efficient, reducing the number of beatings handed out for slow progress. You find yourself part of a small network of mutual support. When you're too sick to work, others cover for you. When they're weak, you share whatever extra food you can scrounge. It's not organized or formal, just human beings looking out for each other in the face of systematic dehumanization. Sometimes the guards participate in these small mercies, not often, and never predictably, but occasionally a guard will look the other way when a prisoner takes an extra moment to rest, or will provide medical supplies from his own kit for a prisoner with a severe wound. These moments of humanity are precious beyond gold. They remind you that beneath the uniforms and the ideologies, everyone involved in this horror is still human. That recognition might be the only thing that keeps you sane. Men die constantly on the railway, some from disease, some from accidents, some from exhaustion and malnutrition. The bodies are buried in shallow graves along the route, marked only with crude wooden crosses or piles of stone. At least 250,000 Southeast Asian civilians were subjected to forced labor to ensure the construction of the death railway, and more than 90,000 civilians died building it, as did around 12,000 Allied soldiers. 12,000 Allied soldiers dead, but the numbers don't capture the individual tragedies. Williams dying of cerebral malaria while calling for his wife, Henderson falling from a bridge and drowning in the muddy river below, Patterson simply lying down one evening and never getting up again. You become numb to death. It's a defense mechanism, a way of protecting your sanity when men you've grown to care about disappear regularly. You stop learning new prisoners' names because getting attached only makes the loss harder to bear. But some deaths still hit hard. Vandenberg dies of typhus in the 6th month, despite his medical knowledge and the care of every prisoner in the camp. Kowalski is shot by a guard for protesting the execution of a sick prisoner who couldn't work. Williams succumbs to a combination of malaria and dysentery that his weakened body can't fight off. Each death takes something from you, not just the loss of a friend, but the loss of another connection to the world outside the wire. Another reminder that you were once a person with a name and a life, and people who cared about you. After 18 months of hell, the railway is finished. By the time the railway was completed in October 1943, at least 2,015 Australians, over 11,000 other Allied prisoners, and perhaps 75,000 Renusha were dead. The first train makes the journey from Thailand to Burma in October 1943, carrying supplies and reinforcements for the Japanese army fighting in Burma. You watch that first train pass through your section of track, and you feel something you haven't experienced in months. Pride, despite everything. The starvation, the disease, the brutality, the death. You built something. Your hands cleared the jungle, laid the rails, constructed the bridges. Men died for every mile of track. But the railway exists. Of course, the pride is complicated by knowledge of what the railway will be used for. It will carry supplies that will help Japanese forces kill Allied soldiers. It will extend the war and cost more lives. But in the moment, watching that train roll past on rails you helped lay, you feel like a human being again instead of a walking corpse. The completion of the railway doesn't mean release. Most prisoners are transferred to other camps, other projects. Some are sent to Japan to work in factories and mines. Others remain in Thailand as maintenance crews, keeping the railway operational despite Allied bombing raids that increase in frequency as the war turns against Japan. With the railway completed, you're transferred to a maintenance camp at Tamarkan, one of the more permanent installations along the line. The work is different now. Repairing bomb damage from Allied air raids, replacing worn rails, keeping the bridges functional. It's still brutal labor, but it lacks the desperate urgency of the construction phase. The camp at Tamarkan is marginally better than the jungle work sites. The barracks are more permanent, the food supply slightly more reliable, and there's even a rudimentary medical facility run by a British doctor who managed to keep some surgical instruments hidden from the guards. But you're not the same person who arrived in Thailand over a year ago. Your body is a collection of scars, poorly healed wounds and chronic ailments. Malaria recurs regularly, leaving you weak and feverish. Your teeth are loose from malnutrition, and several have simply fallen out. Tropical ulcers on your legs have left permanent scars that ache in the humid weather. Mentally, the damage is harder to catalog, but no less real. You find yourself unable to concentrate for long periods. Loud noises make you jump. You don't trust easily.
and you never relax completely. Sleep brings nightmares filled with the faces of dead friends and the sound of guards shouting "Speedo." As 1944 progresses, Allied bombing raids become more frequent and more accurate. The railway you helped build becomes a target, and you find yourself in the surreal position of hoping for the destruction of your own work. The raids usually come during the day, when you can see the bombers approaching, silver specks in the blue sky that grow larger and louder until the whistle of falling bombs drowns out everything else. You've learned to recognize the different sounds. The deep drone of B-24 Liberators, the higher pitch of fighter bombers, the distinctive whistle that means bombs are falling nearby. When the air raid sirens sound, everyone takes cover wherever they can find it. The Japanese guards disappear into proper bunkers, leaving the prisoners to huddle in ditches, or under whatever shelter they can improvise. You've been strafed by Allied fighters whose pilots couldn't distinguish between Japanese guards and Allied prisoners, and you've been wounded by shrapnel from bombs intended to free you. War, you learn, is absurd in ways that no one talks about in the recruitment poster. Prison camp life creates its own social structure, different from anything that exists in the outside world. At the top are the prisoners who found ways to make themselves useful to the Japanese. Interpreters, skilled workers, anyone whose death would inconvenience the guard. These prisoners get marginally better food, lighter work assignments, and are less likely to be beaten for minor infractions. Below them are the ordinary prisoners who keep their heads down, work steadily, and avoid attracting attention. This is where you fit. Invisible, competent enough to be useful, careful never to stand out. At the bottom are the sick, the injured, and the defiant. These prisoners receive smaller rations, harder work assignments, and brutal punishment for any perceived failure. It's a vicious cycle. Reduced rations lead to weakness. Weakness leads to poor work performance. Poor performance leads to punishment, and even smaller rations. You learn to navigate this hierarchy carefully. You help other prisoners when you can, but never in ways that might cost you your own survival. You share information and resources, but you also hoard anything that might keep you alive one more day. The moral compromises are constant and agonizing, but they're necessary. Survival requires a kind of emotional calculus that no civilian can understand. How much risk can you take to help a friend? When does loyalty become suicidal? How do you maintain your humanity while making the daily choices necessary to stay alive? Occasionally, prisoners are allowed to write letters home, though the censorship is so severe that most letters contain no real information. You write the same meaningless phrases over and over. I am well and being treated fairly. The food is adequate. Please don't worry about me. Sometimes letters arrive from home, months or even years after they were written. Your mother writes about the victory garden she's planted, about rationing and war bonds, about how proud she is of her son serving his country. She has no idea what serving your country actually means in a place like this. Even rarer are Red Cross packages, boxes containing food, medicine and basic supplies intended for prisoners of war. The Japanese are supposed to distribute these packages according to international law, but most never reach the prisoners they're intended for. When packages do arrive, they're usually looted, with the most valuable items removed before distribution. But even a partial Red Cross package is a treasure beyond description. A can of corned beef, a chocolate bar, a bottle of aspirin. These items represent not just nutrition and medicine, but proof that the outside world still exists and still cares about your survival. You hoard these treasures carefully, trading them for other necessities or saving them for moments when you're too sick to work and need extra nutrition to recover. A single can of meat might be the difference between life and death during a bout of dysentery. The camp hospital is a bamboo barracks where the sickest prisoners go to recover or die. It's run by Dr. Morrison, a British Army physician, who was captured in Singapore and has somehow maintained his medical ethics, despite having almost no supplies or equipment. You spend 2 weeks in the hospital with a severe case of malaria, burning with fever and hallucinating about home. Morrison treats you with quinine. He's managed to save from a Red Cross package, cool water and sheer determination. The bed is just bamboo slats, with a thin mat, but it's the first time you've been horizontal during daylight hours in over a year. The hospital is also where you see the worst effects of prolonged captivity. Men with tropical ulcers that have eaten through to the bone. Prisoners blinded by untreated infections. Soldiers who've lost arms or legs to accidents or infections and lie staring at nothing, waiting to die. Morrison moves between the beds like a ghost, doing what he can with almost nothing. He sets broken bones without x-rays, performs surgery with improvised instruments, and treats tropical diseases with remedies he's learned from trial and error. Many of his patients die anyway, but some recover, and those recoveries represent small victories against the machinery of death that surrounds you. You help Morrison when you can, holding patients during procedures, changing bandages, feeding prisoners too weak to feed themselves. The work is heartbreaking but also therapeutic. Taking care of others helps you maintain the feeling that you're still a human being with value and purpose. Long-term imprisonment does things to your mind that you don't fully understand until years later. Time becomes elastic. Some days drag on forever, while entire weeks disappear without leaving much memory. You develop a kind of tunnel vision, focusing only on immediate survival needs, while losing the ability to think about the future. Some prisoners retreat into themselves, becoming almost catatonic. They perform their assigned work mechanically, but seem to have lost all initiative and personality. Others become hypervigilant, constantly scanning for threats and opportunities, never relaxing or trusting anyone completely. You find yourself somewhere in the middle, functional but damaged, capable of forming relationships but always holding something back. You've learned not to depend too heavily on anyone else because people disappear without warning, and you've learned not to let anyone depend too heavily on you because you might not be able to help when they need it most. The guards also show the effects of prolonged involvement in this system. Some become increasingly brutal, as if cruelty becomes addictive. Others seem to go through the motions without enthusiasm, following orders but taking no pleasure in the suffering they inflict. A few show signs of conscience, occasionally making small gestures of kindness when they think no one is watching.
As 1945 begins, rumors circulate constantly about the progress of the war. The bamboo telegraph carries stories of German defeats in Europe, of American victories in the Pacific, of Japanese cities burning under Allied bombing raids. Most of these stories are probably false or exaggerated, but they provide hope during the darkest moments. The guards seem more nervous than before, less confident in their casual brutality. Supply shipments arrive less frequently and the quality of food and medicine decreases. Sometimes you hear aircraft overhead that don't sound Japanese, and the guards look worried when they hear them. But hope is dangerous in a prison camp. It can lead to careless behavior, to taking risks that get you killed when freedom might be just months away. You learn to carry hope quietly, like a small flame that provides warmth without attracting attention. Some prisoners become convinced that liberation is imminent and stop taking care of themselves. They use up their carefully hoarded supplies, stop exercising, and lose the mental discipline that has kept them alive. When liberation doesn't come as quickly as expected, they often don't survive the disappointment. Others become more careful than ever, understanding that the most dangerous time might be just before the war ends. Japanese guards facing defeat. might decide to eliminate the evidence of their war crimes. Desperate soldiers might take their frustrations out on prisoners. The railway that you built might become your tomb if someone decides that dead witnesses tell no tales. Living in such close proximity to your captors for years, you begin to understand them as individuals rather than just uniformed enemies. Some are career soldiers who joined the army before the war and find themselves administering prison camps because that's where the army sent them. Others are recent conscripts who are as miserable and homesick as you are. The guards have their own hierarchy, their own fears, their own struggles with the brutality they're required to inflict. Junior guards are often more vicious than their superiors, trying to prove their loyalty and toughness. Senior non-commissioned officers tend to be more pragmatic, understanding that dead prisoners can't work and that excessive brutality might be punished after the war. Some guards seem to enjoy the power they have over prisoners, taking obvious pleasure in inflicting pain and humiliation, but others appear uncomfortable with their role, carrying out orders reluctantly and sometimes showing unexpected kindness when they think they won't be observed. You learn to read the guards' moods and adjust your behavior accordingly. Some respond to respectful submission, others to displays of competence and usefulness. All of them respond badly to any sign of defiance or disrespect, but the consequences vary dramatically depending on the individual guard's personality and state of mind. Understanding your captors doesn't make you sympathize with them, but it does make you better at surviving their authority. And survival after 3 years of captivity has become your primary skill and your only religion. By mid-1945, the atmosphere in the camp has changed dramatically. Supply shipments arrive irregularly, and when they do come, they contain lower quality food and fewer medical supplies. The guards seem nervous, talking among themselves in urgent whispers and looking worried when they think prisoners aren't watching. The bombing raids are now a daily occurrence. Allied aircraft fly overhead with impunity, and the railway you helped build is being systematically destroyed. Bridges are bombed, tracks are cratered, and repair work becomes futile as new raids undo any progress made. Some prisoners begin to dare to hope that liberation is finally approaching. Others worry that desperate Japanese commanders might decide to eliminate all evidence of their war crimes by executing the prisoners. You've heard rumors of camps where this has already happened. Mass graves filled with Allied prisoners shot just before Allied forces arrived. Dr. Morrison tries to prepare for both possibilities. He's been secretly treating prisoners who might be strong enough to escape if the opportunity arises, while also creating hidden caches of medicine for survivors if the camp is overrun by friendly forces. The work continues, but with less intensity. Guards are often absent, apparently needed elsewhere as the Japanese military situation deteriorates. Food becomes even scarcer. But paradoxically, some prisoners begin to recover slightly as the pressure of constant labor decreases. You're assigned to a repair crew that works on the railway bridges, and from this vantage point you can see the broader destruction being wrought by Allied bombers. Entire sections of track have been obliterated, stations destroyed, rolling stock blown apart. The railway that cost so many lives to build is being systematically erased. In August 1945, something changes. The guards receive new orders that seem to confuse them. Work details are cancelled. Prisoners are confined to barracks except for meals and roll call. The camp commandant disappears for several days, leaving the guards uncertain about what they're supposed to do. Then on August 15th, the guards assemble all prisoners for a special announcement. The camp commandant has returned, and he looks like a man who has aged years in a matter of days. Through an interpreter, he reads a statement from the Emperor of Japan announcing the end of the war. The announcement is brief and formal, giving no details about surrender or what will happen to the prisoner. After 3.5 years of captivity, you're free, but freedom feels more terrifying than liberating. What happens now? Where do you go? How do you get home? Are there still Allied forces in the area? Or are you free to die of starvation in the jungle? Some prisoners cheer, but most react with stunned silence. After so many false hopes and disappointed expectations, it's hard to believe that captivity is actually over. The guards maintain their weapons and continue to patrol the perimeter, so the practical situation doesn't seem to have changed much. Over the next few days, the reality begins to sink in. Supply shipments stop coming entirely. Some guards abandon their posts and disappear into the jungle. Others remain at their stations, unsure of what else to do. The prisoners are technically free, but they're still trapped in a remote camp hundreds of miles from friendly territory. Morrison organizes the healthiest prisoners into search parties to look for Allied forces or local civilians who might help with evacuation. Food becomes a critical issue. The camp supplies are nearly exhausted, and without Japanese logistics, there's no way to obtain more. It takes 3 weeks for Allied recovery teams to reach your camp. 3 weeks of uncertainty, of not knowing whether liberation is real or just another false hope. Some prisoners die during this period, their bodies finally giving out just as freedom arrives. When the Allied troops finally appear, British and Australian soldiers who look impossibly healthy and well-equipped, the contrast with your own condition is shocking. You've become so accustomed to seeing only skeletons in rags that these normal-looking soldiers seem like visitors from another world. The medical evaluation is sobering. Of the approximately 800 prisoners who were in your camp at liberation, fewer than 300 are considered healthy enough to travel immediately. The rest need weeks or months of medical treatment before they can be moved to proper hospital. You're among the lucky ones, sick and malnourished, but capable of walking and thinking clearly. Others aren't so fortunate. Men who survived 3 years of captivity die within days of liberation, their bodies unable to handle the shock of freedom and improved medical care. The trip back to Allied territory takes 2 weeks. First by truck through the Thai jungle, then by hospital ship across the Pacific to Australia. Every mile takes you further from the nightmare of captivity, but it also brings you closer to a world you're not sure you remember how to live in. The hospital ship is a revelation. Clean beds with actual mattresses, food that doesn't contain weevils or mold, medical staff who treat you like a human being rather than a burden. But it's also overwhelming. After years of living in a space barely large enough for your body, the ship's corridors seem vast and disorienting. The other liberated prisoners are dealing with their own adjustment issues. Some can't sleep in soft beds, having become accustomed to bamboo slabs. Others can't tolerate being in enclosed spaces, even comfortable ones. Many have lost the ability to make simple decisions, having had every aspect of their lives controlled by guards for years. The ship's medical staff does their best to prepare you for the challenges ahead. But how do you explain to people who've never been prisoners what it means to suddenly have choices again? How do you describe the anxiety that comes with being able to walk through a door without permission? Or the guilt you feel about eating food when so many of your friends died of starvation? During the voyage home, you have time to process what you've experienced and what it means for the rest of your life. You've survived something that killed most of the men who endured it with you. Around 1 in 3 military prisoners died from starvation, work, punishments or disease while held by the Japanese. 1 in 3. You're among the 2 who lived. But survival comes with a price. You're not the same person who was captured 3.5 years ago. That young soldier died somewhere along the way, maybe during the death march, maybe in the jungle while building the railway, maybe during one of the countless moments when you chose your own survival over someone else's needs. The person you've become is harder, more cautious, less trusting. You've seen what human beings are capable of doing to each other when all social constraints are removed. You've made moral compromises that you never imagined you'd have to make. You've watched friends die and felt relief that it wasn't you. These experiences have left marks that won't fade with time or medical treatment. The physical scars will heal, or at least stop hurting as much. The memories will become less vivid, though they'll never disappear completely. But the fundamental changes to your character, your worldview, your understanding of what life means, those are permanent.
As the war crimes trials begin, you're asked to testify about your experiences in Japanese captivity. It's difficult to put into words what you've witnessed and experienced. How do you make a court understand the daily reality of starvation, brutality, and death? How do you convey the desperation that drove ordinary men to extraordinary acts of both cruelty and kindness? In the war crimes trials at Yokohama, a total of 327 cases were brought before the tribunal, and 1,037 Japanese were prosecuted. Of these, there were 22 cases related to mistreatment of POWs, in which 75 Japanese were prosecuted. The trials provide some sense of justice, but they also force you to relive experiences you'd rather forget. Some of your former guards are executed for war crimes, others receive prison sentence, a few are acquitted due to lack of evidence or because they can demonstrate that they treated prisoners humanely. Justice, you learn, is as imperfect as everything else about war. The trials also reveal the scope of what you experienced. Your camp was just one of hundreds. Your suffering was shared by tens of thousands of other prisoners across the Pacific. The railway you built was just one project among many that consumed Allied prisoners like fuel. This knowledge is both comforting and devastating. Comforting because it means you weren't alone in your ordeal. Devastating because it means the system that nearly killed you was vast, organized, and deliberately designed to treat human beings as expendable resources. Coming home is harder than you expected. Your family tries to understand what you've been through, but their experience of the war was rationing, victory gardens, and worrying about letters from overseas. They can't comprehend starvation, torture, and watching friends die of preventable diseases. You find yourself unable to relate to civilian concerns that once seemed important. Traffic jams, bad weather, work problems. These inconveniences seem trivial compared to what you've survived. At the same time, simple pleasures like hot food, clean clothes, and a comfortable bed seem almost too good to be true. Sleep is difficult. The nightmares are constant and vivid. Guards shouting, friends dying, the endless repetition of back-breaking labor under the tropical sun. You wake up expecting to hear the sound of metal striking bamboo, calling you to another day of survival. Relationships are complicated. How do you explain to a girlfriend or wife why you flinch at sudden movements, why you can't stand to be in crowded spaces, why you hoard food even when you're not hungry? How do you bridge the gap between the person you were before the war and the person you've become? Years pass, decades. The acute memories fade slightly, though they never disappear completely. You learn to function in civilian society, to hold jobs, to maintain relationships, to find meaning in a world that often seems frivolous compared to the life and death struggles you've survived. Some former prisoners never adjust. They drink too much, can't hold jobs, struggle with relationships and families. Others become overachievers, driven to accomplish as much as possible while they're still alive. A few find peace in helping other veterans, sharing their experiences and providing support for men dealing with similar trauma. You fall somewhere in between, functional but changed, capable of happiness but always aware of how quickly circumstances can change. How thin the line is between civilization and brutality. How much of human behavior depends on social structures that can disappear overnight. The railway you helped build is eventually abandoned. Sections are reclaimed by the jungle you fought so hard to clear. Bridges collapse. Tracks rust and stations crumble. Nature erases the scars, though not the memories of the men who died creating. War memorials are built. Books are written. Documentaries are made. The story of the Death Railway becomes part of military history, studied by academics, and remembered on memorial days. But the sanitized historical version can never capture the daily reality of life and death.
The jungle, the individual tragedies of men who died far from home, the moral complexity of survival under impossible conditions. What did you learn during those 3.5 years of captivity? That human beings are capable of both extraordinary cruelty and remarkable kindness, often within the same individual. That civilization is fragile and can disappear quickly when social structures collapse. That survival often depends less on physical strength than on mental flexibility and the ability to adapt to changing circumstances. You learned that dignity can be maintained even under the most degrading conditions, but that maintaining it requires constant effort and frequent compromise. You learned that loyalty to friends and comrades is essential for survival, but that absolute loyalty can be fatal. You learned that hope is necessary but dangerous, that despair is understandable but often self-fulfilling. Most importantly, you learned that ordinary people can endure extraordinary suffering and still retain their humanity, though not without cost. The men who survived Japanese captivity were forever changed by the experience, but they remained recognizably human. They formed relationships, created meaning from suffering, and found ways to help each other survive. These lessons are not comfortable or inspiring in the way that movie portrayals of war often are. They're complex, morally ambiguous, and often painful to acknowledge, but they're real in ways that sanitized heroic narratives are not. As you sit in your comfortable home, decades after liberation, you sometimes wonder what happened to the other survivors. Some you've kept in touch with. Christmas cards, occasional phone calls, reunions that become less frequent as the years pass and more chairs sit empty. Others disappeared into their own lives, wanting no reminders of what they experienced. Dr. Morrison became a country doctor in Australia, spending his life helping people heal from ordinary illnesses and injuries. He never spoke publicly about his experiences until shortly before his death, when he gave a brief interview to a local newspaper. "We did what we had to do," he said. "Nothing more, nothing less." Kowalski didn't make it home. He died of complications from malaria 6 months after liberation, his body finally succumbing to damage that accumulated over years of captivity. But he lived long enough to see freedom, which was more than many of his friends achieved. The Japanese guards from your camps had their own post-war stories. Some were executed as war criminals. Others served prison sentences and then tried to rebuild their lives in a defeated nation. A few expressed remorse for their actions, though whether that remorse was genuine or calculated remains unclear. The railway you built with your blood and sweat served its purpose for less than 2 years before being abandoned. Today, sections of it operate as tourist attractions, with comfortable trains carrying visitors through landscapes that once echoed with the screams of dying men. The irony is not lost on you. There are stories that will never be told because the men who lived them didn't survive to tell them. There are acts of heroism and sacrifice that went unwitnessed except by the dead. There are atrocities that were never documented, suffering that was never recorded, deaths that were never officially acknowledged. History tries to capture the broad outlines of what happened, but it cannot encompass the individual experiences of every man who lived and died in Japanese captivity. Your story is just one among thousands, significant to you and your family, but lost in the larger narrative of global conflict. Yet your story matters, not because it's unique, but because it's representative. It illustrates what war actually means to the individuals who fight it, as opposed to the nations that wage it. It shows the human cost of political decisions made by people who never have to pay that cost personally. The young men who were captured in 1942 were ordinary people, farm boys and factory workers, college students and shop clerks. They became extraordinary through suffering, but the person who survived wasn't necessarily better than the person who went in, just different, harder, more aware of life's fragility and humanity's capacity for both good and evil. If there's a message in your story, it's not a simple one about heroism or patriotism or the triumph of good over evil. It's a more complex message about endurance, adaptation, and the price of survival. It's about the choices people make when all their options are bad, and about the way ordinary individuals respond to extraordinary circumstances. War is often portrayed as a noble struggle between competing ideologies, but at the individual level it's simply about staying alive long enough to go home. Everything else, honor, duty, country, cause, becomes secondary to the immediate needs of survival. This isn't a failure of character. It's a recognition of what matters when everything else has been stripped away. The men who built the death railway weren't heroes in the conventional sense. They were victims who found ways to survive victimization. They endured because the alternative was death, and most of them wanted to live more than they wanted to die with dignity. That's not inspirational, it's simply human. Your experiences in Japanese captivity continue to shape your understanding of current events. When you see news reports of wars, genocides, and human rights abuses around the world, you recognize patterns that civilians might miss. You understand how quickly normal people can become perpetrators or victims, how social structures that seem permanent can collapse overnight. You also understand the importance of international laws and institutions that try to prevent or limit such abuses. The Geneva Conventions that the Japanese ignored weren't just legal documents. They were attempts to maintain some vestige of humanity even in the midst of organized violence. When nations ignore these laws, real people pay the price in suffering and death. The world has not learned the lessons that your generation paid so dearly to teach. Wars continue, prisoners are still tortured, civilians are still targeted, and the strong still prey upon the weak. But institutions exist now that didn't exist in 1942, and there's at least some international framework for holding perpetrators accountable. It's not enough, but it's something. And sometimes when you're feeling particularly pessimistic about human nature, something is enough to maintain hope. In the end, what was the point of your suffering? What purpose was served by the deaths of so many good men? What meaning can be found in 3.5 years of brutality, starvation, and fear? These are questions without satisfactory answers. The railway was built and then abandoned. The war was won, but other wars followed. The dead remained dead, and the living remained scarred. Justice was partial and imperfect. The world moved on to new crises and forgot the lessons that seemed so important immediately after the war. But meaning doesn't always come from grand purposes or historical significance. Sometimes it comes from smaller things. The fact that you helped other prisoners survive, that you maintained your humanity under inhuman conditions, that you bore witness to events that might otherwise be forgotten. You survived to tell the story, and in telling it, you honor the memory of those who didn't survive. Their names might not appear in history books, but they're remembered by someone who knew them, who saw them die, who understands what their lives meant. That's not everything, but it's not nothing either. If there's wisdom to be passed on from your experience, it's this: human beings are capable of both terrible cruelty and remarkable resilience. Civilization is precious and fragile, but it can survive even the worst attempts to destroy it. Individual dignity can be maintained even under the most degrading circumstances, though the cost of maintaining it is often higher than anyone should have to pay. War is not glorious or noble or inspiring. It's brutal and dehumanizing and wasteful. But within the framework of war, individuals can still choose to act with honor, compassion, and courage. These choices don't make war acceptable, but they make it survivable. The most important lesson might be the simplest: pay attention to other people's suffering, and do what you can to prevent or alleviate it. The world is full of people who are enduring their own versions of captivity. Political prisoners, refugees, victims of oppression and abuse. Their circumstances might be different from yours, but their need for recognition and support is the same. You can't save everyone, but you can acknowledge that their suffering matters. You can refuse to look away when it's convenient to ignore atrocity. You can support institutions and individuals who work to protect human rights and human dignity. These are small things, but they're the foundation of the civilization that you fought to preserve and that others died to defend. In a world that often seems governed by power and self-interest,
Simple human decency becomes a form of resistance. Even now, decades after your liberation, questions remain that have no easy answers. Could you have done more to help your fellow prisoner? Should you have taken greater risks to resist your captors? Were the moral compromises you made necessary for survival, or were they failures of character? These questions will never be fully resolved, and perhaps that's appropriate. Easy answers would suggest that the moral complexities of extreme situations can be reduced to simple formulas, which they cannot. The fact that these questions continue to trouble you is evidence that your moral sense survived captivity intact, even if it was tested and sometimes bent by circumstance. What matters is not that you found perfect solutions to impossible dilemmas, but that you continued to struggle with moral questions even when survival seemed to depend on abandoning morality altogether. That struggle, more than any particular decision, is what defines your character and your humanity. The men who built the death railway were ordinary people placed in extraordinary circumstance. They responded as human beings respond: imperfectly, inconsistently, but with a stubborn determination to remain human despite every pressure to become something less. That determination, tested under the worst possible conditions, proved that human dignity is not a luxury that disappears when life becomes difficult. It's a fundamental aspect of what makes us human, as essential as breath, and as persistent as the will to survive. Your story is a testament to that truth, and in telling it, you remind us all of what we're capable of enduring and what we must never stop trying to preserve.